And yeah, just very much welcome to John Little for coming to speak to us today in our last seminar of the People in Nature Lab seminar series. And he's going to be talking about the potential of post-industrial landscapes and what happens when we transition nature from capital to care. And John is the director of Care Not Capital CIC. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope that this works. So just sort of toggling with the slide.
Am I going to be loud enough without a mic? Could be. Does it matter? If you can hear me, could you hear me up there? You can. Okay.
You've always got the option of me.
You got the option of joining us, yeah? You got the option of joining us. Okay, that's all right. No worries. Okay. Well, thanks very much for inviting me, and thanks for providing such a big venue. It's very airy and lovely in here. Such a big screen as well. I don't think I've ever talked in front of such a big screen. It feels like there should be some sort of Pearl and Dean music kicking off, doesn't it? Anyway, lovely to see you all, and apologies to people who have heard me talk before, because there will be some similar slides to what you've probably seen, because I'm very interested in certain subjects that aren't changing quite enough, so I just keep talking about them. So you end up with a similar slide. So there'll be a core of slides that if you've seen me before, you will have seen before. So I guess the big thing for me, and the nice thing, I guess, for me, is the word potential, because I really think that potentially spaces where you're starting from scratch, in other words, brand new pieces of landscape that might come on the back of industry, come on the back of development, highways, whatever it is, I think they can become really good really quick. And there's lots and lots of evidence now that's kicking off to say that that's definitely the case. And that's good, isn't it? That's exciting. And I think also we need to get rid of that kind of illusion in my head that the only wildlife we have is in our nature reserves, and it has to be nature reserve-y sort of places that create the wildlife. And I'm saying that you can go from scratch to really good for wildlife pretty quick if you're just a bit creative about the way you design the space, and more importantly, you're creative about how you look after it and invest in looking after it, because that is pretty much the key to driving biodiversity in my head. Okay, not changing. Sideways? No. Cursor, maybe?
I sort of pressed firmly in the bottom.
Okay, so I'm using the pad to change, not the arrows here. Oh, well, that one's working now. Yeah. Okay, right.
So left and
weird. Right. Okay, so this is the place down near me. Dr. Feelgood area, Canvey. This has gone from nothing to really good, like exceptionally good from an environment point of view in 50 years. So that's gone from something that's pretty bleak into something that's better than most of our bucolic nature reserve-y places in 50 years. That's pretty good, isn't it? 50 years from scratch to that, pretty good. What I guess I'm arguing is that we could, if we had a hand in designing that at the beginning, surely we could make that happen even quicker than 50 years, couldn't we? Because we're smart, aren't we? There's loads of smart people designing places, loads of smart people that understand ecology. Why can't we design it? And if we were designing that from scratch, surely we could have made that even better, couldn't we? Otherwise, what's the point of this if we can't do it better than that's happening? And the other thing to remember also is that 20% of our SSSI sites, in other words, 20% of our best quality wildlife sites, are on the back of us trashing a place and then leaving it alone for a bit. Yeah, chalk pits, quarries, sand pits. This is where all the action is, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? This is where all the wildlife is. And so this is good, isn't it? This means that we can smash the place to pieces. We can do all the things we're doing, but if actually we understand what's going on here and be creative about the way we reinstate green space on the back of development and stuff, then we can make it really, really good, can't we? So, and we can go from, these are a few more post-industrial. I think post-industrial is quite a good term to describe quite a lot of our landscape. So a lot of our industry has virtually did obliterate wildlife, and agriculture basically obliterated most of our wildlife. This is my mate Ed in Maryland in the States. This is his family farm, chemically soaked, glyphosate soaked dairy, soya, the usual stuff. And he has transformed this place now in a very short space of time. And I would describe this as a post-industrial, an apocalyptic landscape, social housing. So what have we done in social housing? So we decided in the, I don't know, it'd been maybe the 80s, we decided it would be a great idea to extract all the money and the joy and the gardeners and the care out of the poorest parts of our cities, didn't we? By taking away the maintenance money. That's what we decided. It's a great idea, isn't it? It really, really works. And let's think where the most deprived area is, where people need green space more, where it's more important for everything. And we'll just take all the money away from that. And then you end up with this shit, which is what we sort of started with in the year 2000. And so at Clapton Park. This is what happens when you take people out of a landscape. And this is what happens when you extract the important stuff, which is people's energy to look after a place and care for it and to make it do the things it should do for the people that live there. So this is definitely a post-industrial landscape. And we, in our world, or my little world of South Essex, we have lots of these as well. Now, these are quite exciting places because basically we've dug a big hole, whether it be for chalk or for gravel, like where we are, either way, and then we've filled it up with mostly your rubbish, actually, mostly London rubbish, filled up our place in South Essex. And then we've filled them up. Well, we don't just fill them up, of course. We fill them up. We make a big mound because we can't get enough in on the level. We make a big mound of rubbish to get even more in. And then we have to cap them off, don't we? Once we've done this and we can't get any more in, then we cap them off. And that is the joyous moment. That's the time to actually do something really good, isn't it? Because you're bringing in everything to cap these things off. You've got to bring in the material to do that. Look what you could do. Let's not do what we normally do, which is obviously, okay, put a bit of clay on to seal it off, and then we blanket it with topsoil and we smooth it all out. That's the way we cap off landfills, generally. Look what we could do. Bring in lots of different materials, right? Lots and lots of different materials, make it much more fascinating from a topography point of view, bring in much more structural stuff. There's enough money involved in capping off landfill sites to actually make them really cool, isn't there? You know what I mean? I know it's happening a bit more now, and there's a bit more conversation about this, but in general, that's what it is. And the other wonderful thing about landfill sites is that you don't have a user group, right? You don't have some kind of annoying historical stuff to worry about. You have nothing to worry about, do you? And they're not going to build houses on for quite a long while because they're all a bit all over the place. So that surely they are, what a place to actually have an involvement in the creation of somewhere really good on top of a landfill site. The potential is massive, but we still kind of do that smooth it all over thing. And we should force people with money, like developers, when they build a housing estate, which they absolutely need to do, though obviously we could do a few more of these being affordable, to say the least. We should absolutely force developers to create a green space that's absolutely ran with biodiversity and, more importantly, ran with joy for the people that are living there so that they want to use it. And I'll talk about this a bit later, the combination of those two things, very important. Here's an amazing landscape, isn't it? Look at those gardens, one after the other after the other. Now, if you took that section of landscape and plonked it in a very rural place, it would be the best landscape, and the best, the most biodiverse place in the whole of your rural landscape if you just took those gardens and plonked them into a piece of countryside. Because look how complicated they are. Look how wonderfully different they all are. And it's the difference and the complication, as we all know, that drives biodiversity, isn't it? You know, so it absolutely doesn't matter if there's a bloke there who just wants lawn No, and I know we all moan about him, you know, oh, it's terrible, you can't use that lawn. Well, yeah, that's absolutely great, because the next person has got shrubs, the next one's got herbaceous, the next one's got a bad shed and all that. So that is what makes gardens so amazing. So we want that level of complication in our new public space, in effect, don't we? And I think what we need, and this is being proven gradually now, I don't know whether anyone's read the biodiversity report from Great Dixter. Okay, it's a bit horticultural, maybe not too haughty in here. Anyway, Great Dixter, one of the most famous gardens in the UK, the most famous garden in the UK, I'd say. A few years back, decided they were going to do a biodiversity report, a thorough look at the biodiversity of their gardens. Now, this is a place that's very gardened and very gardeny, and you know, it's big herbaceous borders, and it's all those wonderful things that English gardens often are. Turns out one of the most biodiverse places by far in the area that it's in. More biodiversity than the nature reserve. Yeah, because it has that intensity of care. It has that intensity of horticulture in effect to grow. You know, like Fergus, the guy who looks after it, Fergus Garrett, he produces flowers from January to December. Not necessarily from a biodiversity point of view, but because people who come there expect that. So he has this intensively gardened, packed with pollen and nectar, completely packed with pollen and nectar, and packed with incredible structural vegetation diversity, because it's the diversity of vegetation structure that makes them look good. That makes people like that sort of place. But that is the thing that drives biodiversity as well. So I think there's a big argument for viewing this mix of semi-natural, you know, I don't know, if you want, for want of a better word, wood pasture, mix of grassland, shrub, tree, you know, like we know is really good, and an intensively gardened space. And I think we need community gardens and garden places plonked into nature reserves. And I know it will make them way, way better from a biodiversity point of view. And it will get people in there looking at them, and it will get people understanding the biodiversity and engaging with the nature reserve. Because let's be honest, you know, how far do people go from the visitor centre? Not very far. So put the community centre, put the community garden close in the nature reserve there. And we've had this up the road from us at the Essex Wildlife Trust Nature Reserve. One of the volunteers campaigned to put a community garden in part of the nature reserve. He campaigned. The Wildlife Trust were absolutely against it, and anyway, he is a keen geezer. He managed to make it happen. He took over an acre and a half of hawthorn scrub. He left the best trees, all the interesting trees. Took out some of the dark, dense hawthorn scrub that wasn't much use, and people came and created gardens, individual gardens in this community space. And if you go in there, if you walk in there, it is like a total joy. It's like, for my mind, one of the best places. It's got all that kind of human joy and commitment and variation and all those other things. And it is rammed with biodiversity. And it has the most mad mix of plants, small ponds, big ponds, scrappy areas, compost bins. We even built a green roof shed for them. But anyway, that's probably the least good bit of the whole thing. It's got all those different things. Way more biodiverse than the nature reserve. Way more biodiverse than the bit of hawthorn scrub that's right next to them. So I think that combo is a winner. And I mean, this is another example. Allotments are, time and time again, allotments come out very high on biodiversity, because I think the allotments, it's not so much people's taste, it's people's optimism that drives this, where you turn up on an allotment and you go, right, let's say I'm going to feed myself all year now. It's all going to be good. I'm all going to be homegrown, what I'm going to eat. And then, of course, you never do that. You cultivate a little bit of it, and then the rest of it turns to shit. So it's that combination of cultivating and not cultivating, and that kind of mixture of things like that that drives the biodiversity. And probably as importantly, you're obliged to put a really, really bad shed up, And the shed gives you the structural diversity, that wonderful structure. If you go into an old, dilapidated allotment shed, it's like you're covered in biodiversity, aren't you? You know, there's spiders everywhere. There'd probably be a bird's nest in there. There's fox nesting underneath it. There's butterflies hibernating in it. You know, all those things happen within structure. And we don't design in bad sheds to our new environment and our new green space, do we, on the whole? We need structure in our environment to drive biodiversity. So here's a post-industrial space. So we were here in February, and we were lucky enough to talk to Richard, the director of the High Line. And what I think is very interesting about it, there's a few things interesting about this. One is 6.5 million people walk down it every year. The most important tourist attraction virtually in New York now. And one of the reasons it is so visited and so good is because they spend £700,000 an acre looking after it. £700,000 an acre to look after it, compared to £7,000 an acre for a standard New York park. And then they wonder why this is the best tourist attraction in New York. Now, I'm not suggesting we have the money, unfortunately, to spend £700,000 an acre on social housing in the UK, but this is the issue. The level of care, the level of, how you can adapt the space to suit the people that are living there and get the biodiversity in. That only comes with investing in people to look after it, if you ask me. And to be honest, I think the High Line should, because I don't think it's not all that for biodiversity. I think it should be used, in my head, it should be much more of a ecological space, in that they should have lots of different ecological structures and ideas and interpretation, because what they've got is lots of people, so they could inform lots of people. But they can't do that because it's Altdorf and it's all a bit kind of arty. So they're not allowed to do that sort of thing. But I think they're missing a trick here. With that many people, look how much information you could embed into people's heads. So this is my mate Ed on his farm. And how long ago, about 35 years ago, he started a little nursery growing green roof plant. And he becomes so successful on his 5-acre nursery within his 200-acre farm that he thought, oh, I'm not going to bother farming the rest of it. I'll make enough money out of my 5-acre nursery. So I'm going to, well, in effect, I suppose he rewilded, although it wasn't called that 35 years ago. And now it is an astonishing place. And the biodiversity and the insect noise is virtually overpowering in this place. So he's gone from chemically soaked industrial space to 35 years later, again, being one of the most biodiverse places in that whole area of Maryland. Spectacular. And you can make, obviously, housing estates good, and we absolutely should spend money on putting more gardeners into social housing, well, into all public space, but into social housing. Add a gardener or two and see what happens. Everything changes. I mean, I would say, in my opinion, that the residents on our estate would much rather have seen a few more gardeners just caring about the place and tweaking it slightly to suit how they want it than they would a massive core 10 steel raised bed. I definitely think they would much rather see people than infrastructure. I really do. And if we start to spend money on that instead of stuff all the time, we could absolutely transfer the housing estate, and then we could transform contracts. Because no good just talking about this stuff. You actually have to write it into the contract. So let's write into the contract. You must stop, chat, and listen to residents in the contract. You must drive good public. You must generate good publicity for the estate in the contract. You must stop, listen, and then discuss what residents want who live there, and then try and do it in the contract. Now, when we signed the contract in around 2000, it just said, cut the grass this many times a year, trim the hedge, don't go more than 20% weed cover, or whatever else the bullshit was. And all the things that we did on the housing estate that weren't in the contract were the things that people liked. Right? There's nothing in this is changed now, I'm sure, and I mean it's better now. But when we started, everything that was in the contract, I'd say, wasn't very interesting for people and wasn't important. as important. So if you're a good grounds maintenance contractor, this is what happens. So this is a picture of Zainab baking bread in the garden outside her flat, and this happened because we stopped long enough to listen to what she wanted. She wanted to grow vegetables. We gave her space to grow vegetables. Then when she was comfortable in the space, she started baking her bread. So that for me is good grounds maintenance contract, and there's not a plant in it. You know, that's the potential of good gardeners can have on a place. And that doesn't cost. How much does that cost? I've done nothing. I've just made her comfortable about where she is. She collects the wood from around the estate, has a fire, bakes her bread. Now, obviously, the contract manager doesn't need to know that, and still doesn't know that, I'm guessing. Stuff like this we do. So cheap things. That just requires gardening to make that happen. So colour was definitely a thing, I'd say, on social housing, and very, very important. And you can deliver that really cheaply if you've got more gardeners. So, in general, the biodiversity conversation, and I'm going to drift back to that now. Now I've had my rant about gardeners. You can relax now. I'm past that now. I'm over it, nearly. This conversation about what actually is good for biodiversity, and in my mind, is very much about a lot of stuff that isn't plants. So structural habitat and all the other things that come with that are, in my mind, way more important. Complexity, disturbance, structure, soils, topography, dead things. All those things tend to be forgotten a bit and tend not to be designed into brand new landscapes. And I would say those are as important, if not more important, than the plant choice. In fact, I'd say for sure that's the case. So we need to build these things in beautifully. We need to make them look good. They need to be biodiverse, and they need to look good so people want them outside their house. And the first thing I'd suggest you do is to get in bed with an entomologist. Really, these guys are amazing. So about 9 years ago, I guess now, we met James McGill, top entomologist. He came to our place, and I'd been doing lots of stuff at mine over the years, and I've been telling everyone it's good for biodiversity. I had no idea. I just kind of bullshitted really and just said, "Oh, I'm sure I've seen more insects there. It must be good." As soon as James come along, he was able to tell me whether I was doing good and where I was doing good and where I definitely wasn't doing good. And these guys absolutely open the landscape up for you. If they come into you, they record what's there. And as soon as they've got that species list in front of them, they can tell you what's good about your landscape, what's bad about it, and what you might want to do to make it better. And to understand kind of a bit as well what you should be doing, these two books are pretty good. So this guy, Benedict Donald, I don't know if you've come across Benedict. He runs a company called Restore, which is like a rewilding company. But anyway, fascinating guy. These books are really, really good because they basically show you what the world was like when it functioned really well as an ecosystem, when it was packed full of biodiversity. What was happening? What was going on? What was the disturbance? What were the animals involved? What was the thing that made it good? And these are great books for that, and obviously great things to keep in your head, because essentially what we've done is obviously we've extracted all the fauna that drove loads of these processes, haven't we? We've taken all the bison away, we've taken all the beaver away, we've taken all that huge kind of mega fauna away, and then we've gone, oh, that's weird, the biodiversity's going down. So understanding that was what was driving the biodiversity means that we can replace those animals with us. Another reason for employing people on the ground, because we are the disturbers now, aren't we? We are the bison, we are the beaver, because we can't put these things back into urban places. Obviously, it's happening in rural places, and rewilding is happening on a fairly reasonable scale now, isn't it? And it's starting to get a bit of momentum, which is great. But I don't know what, certainly in my world, it's very much an urban place where we can't have a herd of bison, sadly, running around a housing estate. So we have to do that job. And it's that job that drives the biodiversity, I would say. So that's in effect what gardeners do, don't they? I mean, they root all, in effect. Gardeners root all the time, don't they? They're always knocking the soil around. I mean, obviously not quite to the devastating proportions that what happens when you let a wild boar loose in your landscape for a while. It's quite spectacular what goes on. And I don't know any of you guys, have anyone been to Knepp? Yeah. So they have to manage the pigs quite intensively, because if they let them breed a bit too much and there becomes too many of them, then the acre upon acre becomes like this. So a bit too much disturbance, but obviously a level of disturbance like that is really, really good. And that's what we do as gardeners, exactly what we do. And don't go with that old adage of nature. What is it? It goes, nature floors bare ground. That's, you know, there would have been bare ground everywhere because there'd have been huge animals knocking it around and keeping it bare. And we can mimic grazing quite easily, can't we? You know, I mean, I guess my brother's doing it in quite a reluctant way. He's obviously very unhappy doing it, but even so, he's doing it. There's no reason why we can't manipulate the grazing in the same way that cows do. And you don't have to just let grass grow. You can also scalp grass. So if you put the mower on the low setting and scalp it, you produce bare soil. Hugely important invertebrate habitat if you do that. And of course, what cattle did, or what herbivores did when they were chased around by wolves, which is the other important thing. Obviously, we've removed the wolves now. If you have a pack of wolves running around, then the herds of herbivores get moved on. And that's the joy of it. So they don't stop, because normally they would stay in one place where the best grazing is and just keep eating the same place, obviously, because that makes sense. If you've got wolves chasing them, they have to keep moving. And because they move, you get that lovely rotation in sward height, don't you? And that is the joy. And that's the fascinating thing. And that's what drives biodiversity, is that complex vegetation structure. Salisbury Plain is another example, really, where triple SI site, and one of the reasons it's a triple SI site is because they drive tanks over it, because the tanks do the disturbance that once was done by herbivores. So that's an important site because of the disturbance that goes on from the Ministry of Defence. Very important. So rewilding is definitely not do nothing. Now, I don't know what this looks like now, Jerry, but
it's scrubs.
Yeah. Okay. So this was a SUD scheme that was dumped on me a bit on our housing estate in Hackney. Obviously, there was a period of time where councils were getting thrown SUDS money and said, you know, and they get to the end of the year and they've got to spend it somewhere. So they came and found this little spot in our housing estate, and they dug a hole, huge bits of engineering, huge amounts of soak away and general drainage put in. And then I've got a feeling that someone who was specifying this forgot to specify the top surface, or might have said soil or something. And then the contractor thought, right, that'll do. I'll just put a cheap bit of soil on there, which they did. So fairly sticky topsoil. And the irony, there's several ironies of this, really. One is that it doesn't drain. So there's a big puddle there. And there wasn't a puddle before. But now there's a puddle because it's a SUD scheme with sticky topsoil on. And then I stood there, and I don't know if Jerry was there that day when I stood there with the Hackney bloke.
I was there.
Right. I'm not an angry man, but I could have knocked this geezer over. I stood there with him, and he said, what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to rewild that for you, as if he was doing me a favour. So he basically meant, he basically meant do nothing. I'm going to do nothing for you. That's what he should have said. And then, of course, it turns into bramble, coarse grass, Canadian fleabane, and bramble. Now, I know those plants have a biodiversity use, but the whole of Hackney is full of that stuff, you know, so we don't need that. And most importantly, the people who live here on my estate don't want to look at that. That's in my opinion. They should be given a beautiful space to look at, and it can still function as a SUD thing. And I did mention to the guy, I did ask him where he lived, and I sort of suggested to where he lived might be a wealthier place. And I also suggested that this would never happen in a wealthier part of Hackney, would it? Would they do that in a wealthy part of London? I'd say they definitely wouldn't, would they? So why are they doing it here? So rewilding definitely it's definitely not do nothing. It's much more nuanced than that. So structure and complexity, very, very important. This is our place, and this is I'm just playing around with making it as complicated as I can. I'm really, really concentrating on making it completely complicated and chaotic. Here's another example of structural complexity, I guess. Shopping trolleys in ponds. Not what you want to do, obviously, but that is probably making that pond or stream better for biodiversity than if it wasn't in there, because it's collecting material, it's actually trapping vegetation, it's creating the microclimates, it's making it, I'd say, better. Normally, what would naturally happen, obviously, trees would have fallen into streams and ponds, wouldn't they? Constantly. You know, if you didn't manage a pond or a stream, there would have been loads of stuff just fall into it. And there's some interesting stuff going on the River Lee, where they're felling trees into the river. And what that basically does, you fell a tree into the stream or the river, it slows the flow where the tree is, creates really interesting microclimates and structure. The silt gets deposited where the tree is. Around the outside of the tree, the flow speeds up, the silt gets taken off, and you end up with a gravel bed. So you've immediately made a more interesting and more biodiverse part of the river by dumping a tree in it. And that, in effect, is what a trolley is, an urban tree, I would say. And I also think we can't be too upset and scared of man-made materials. What happens when you ask an ecologist to come and survey your site for newts and reptiles and stuff? He usually comes around and chucks loads of roofing felt around, doesn't he? You know, or shit. Because he knows that actually is what they prefer. They prefer that. And I'd say they probably prefer that to a natural material. I'd say, yeah, they would. So we could incorporate this sort of stuff into design. Put a lovely reclaimed cedar frame around it, put a hinge on it, and then you can incorporate it into your garden, into your public space. Wouldn't that be nice? Here's another very biodiverse place. If it was left alone for a little while, this is in effect a kind of mini industrial, post-industrial space, isn't it? A fly tip. Unbelievably complicated, unbelievable opportunity for niches and pockets and variety, isn't it? Because immediately you've dumped a pile like that, you've got topography, you've also got a mixture of substrates, you've also got loads of voids and loads of places for lots of things to nest. You've got dry places on the top, you've got wet places down the side, you've got a south side and north side, you've got all those things going on in a pile of shit, basically. And we are desperate to try and get the council to leave one of these alone long enough for my mate James, the entomologist, to come and survey this over a 2 or 3 year period. And I'll guarantee you there's more going on in that than there is in the bit next to it very quickly, because look how many opportunities there are for wildlife there. But obviously we can't do that. Obviously we have to tidy it up. So we tidy fly tips up by putting them in cages. So we sort of get in the cage, behave, be tidy. Gabions are very useful for that. They might not be your fave design tool, and I know there's it's a bit of a Marmite thing, Gabions, and a lot of people, and I'm not 100% keen on, but they are incredibly useful for containing a fly tip, incredibly useful for containing structure, unbelievably complicated structure, simply, cheaply, and easily. And the wonderful thing about Gabions is that you can use demolition waste to fill them up with instead of natural stone. You know, normally they'd be mining stone, wouldn't they? Dragging it off across the country, to put in a Gabion cage. Put demolition. This is our Essex stone. We don't have any natural stone in Essex. This is our natural stone, demolition waste. Here's taking demolition waste to the next stage. So we've gone from pile of rubbish, Gabion cage, to this, which is at my place. This is where I phoned up a dry stone waller from Devon one day and said, hey, why don't you come to me in Essex? I'll give you some of my stone, see if you can make a nice dry stone wall out of it. So Duncan turned up and did this, which is probably the most popular part of my garden, by far, the most photographed. All the top designery people are all over it. You're reusing material from the site. You're investing in people and people's trades and skills. You're investing in their hands, aren't you, by making this? right? So the material costs 20 quid and Duncan costs £1,400 to make it. Isn't that a wonderful way round of spending your money? Here's 1,400 quid. Let's give most of it to people. Let's not spend it on Chinese porcelain or whatever else we're going to spend it on. Do you know what I mean? Let's spend it on craft and people's physical skill. And this, as I say, is not only is it a beautiful thing, but it's also taking waste to that pinnacle of respect, isn't it? It's saying waste is really amazing and we're going to actually respect it and do really good things with it. These are just a few more pictures of our places, just to show you the mix of materials and vegetation. We contributed towards this guide, which you can get online. It's easily downloadable as a PDF. This is one of the big things that we're trying to talk about with regard to biodiversity net gain. I don't know whether anyone's involved in biodiversity net gain or whether they've had, whether they've come across it. But obviously it's an important tool for us and it's a good thing that we've got it. We just think that there's some holes in it and also that it needs an urban context. So we're trying to argue, and we're also trying mainly to argue, that open mosaic habitat is unbelievably important in driving biodiversity and it's not given the importance in the metric that it should be. It's absolutely not given the importance in the metric, and to be honest, when it says biodiversity net gain, it doesn't really mean biodiversity net gain. It means habitat net gain. So it's not about the number of species. It's just about the proportion of habitat, and that's, I think, the problem with it within an urban context. Definitely, it's not about driving the maximum biodiversity. It's about actually replacing habitat. So when anyone know Peter Messini? Wonderful geezer. Like he understands green infrastructure. He's been involved in it for many, many years. Now he's obviously quite a force in the BNG conversation. And when he came to our garden the other day to run a course on BNG at my place, he told me that with the current metric, our garden would score 0. Right? 0. So here's our garden. So we have over 1,400 species of invertebrate. We have gone from 60 to 180 bee and wasp species in 8 years, simply because we've changed the structure. We've made it an open mosaic habitat, basically, is what we've done. And most of those 120 species of bee and wasp have arrived or a direct connection to the landscape changes we've made. So all that's happened, that's worth 0 on the metric. It's absolutely bananas. And these are the nuances that we need. And the government is looking at it again. They're in the middle of reviewing BNG. So obviously we're pushing to try and make sure that open mosaic habitat, because the problem with open mosaic habitat as well is that the classification for it is very much when it's evolved through natural processes. So it's when it's evolved through succession, not when you've got it, you've pushed it in there yourself. You've done it. You know what I mean? We've not waited for succession. We've done it ourselves by changing the landscape and making it more complicated. That's got to change. We've now got the second record for the Viper's Buclos bee at our place, and we've also got Shrill Carder bee, which again is a very rare thing that's directly related to some of the landscape changes that we've made. So we're not going to get this sort of landscape in on the back of new development unless we change the metric, unless we make sure they realize it's way more important, because developers aren't going to put it in unless it actually scores. So we must change that metric. And when you think about it, I mean, post-industrial landscapes like the one I showed you in Canvey become amazing in 50 years. What other sort of landscape can we design other than open mosaic that is going to deliver biodiversity quick enough? We can't just plant a few trees in plastic tubes and go, oh, I'll just stand back and wait until it becomes an ancient woodland, then it might be quite good. Open mosaic delivers biodiversity that quick because it delivers such a complexity of structure and landscape. I talked about that. So the other nuance for me, obviously, is the fact that it would be really lovely if biodiversity, again, had some connection to people. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could squeeze that in somewhere? If we had a bit of people net gain, in other words, if we use the Open Mosaic as a template, force developers to actually spend the money in the park or the green space closest to the development, funded a gardener to make a very intensely garden space that delivers biodiversity, and then funded the structural changes in the park that actually benefit the people that live near the development, not to spend their money in a Scottish moor or a, I don't know, where this money's going to. Spend it on people local to the development that's had the disruption, create local jobs, improve the biodiversity where people are actually faced with the development. Wouldn't that be great? So what the metric doesn't do is it doesn't value this kind of novel landscape in effect, and I think we've faced this problem for many years, haven't we? There's been the conservation thing of, the nature's all in the nature reserve, and don't tread on anything. Don't pick a flower. Don't go there because that's really bad. But actually, of course, if you imagine a beautiful wildflower meadow, ancient wildflower meadow, let's say, right? And you looked at that wildflower meadow, you go, oh, that's really nice. It must be good for wildlife. I'm sure it is. What would improve it for wildlife? I'd say letting people walk through the middle of it, because they'd create a desire line, they'd create bare soil, they'd create changes in vegetation. That would absolutely increase the biodiversity of that meadow. Absolutely would. So I think we've been in this kind of world of, I don't know whether it's a class thing. What is it? Still hanging around of like, here's where the conservation is and we know what's best. And actually, people being in the landscape within reason completely drives biodiversity, I would say. So we should embrace novel landscapes, because I don't think we have the luxury of wandering around saying, oh, we'll just make this all a meadow, we'll make this all a woodland. We need all of it in the space, don't we? We don't have enough green space to not make the most of it. And there's all sorts of hideous things happen around in big infrastructure projects. So there's a big infrastructure project that will remain nameless that's going on. And when they reinstate the ground after, putting this huge thing through, they pull out root plates like this to dig the holes, and then they drag them off to their yard, and then they have to get rid of them. They're like, oh God, we've got to get rid of them because we don't know what to do. These things are gold dust for biodiversity. Why on earth isn't there a conversation about when you reinstate the land after you've had these big infrastructure projects and make it really good? Keep this stuff on site, for Christ's sake. Don't take it away. In fact, these I may well be getting myself, because I know some of the ecologists on this particular job, they want to get rid of them. So we're going to send a HIAB lorry and we're going to take them from them if they don't want them, and we're going to put them in our garden. But isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that totally ridiculous? And then there's other things with B&G like this, where we was on a project recently where to get the 10% net gain, they had to have an oak tree of a certain size to get to tick the box, right? So you have this madness going on, this total madness of moving trees this big. Why would you ever do that? So 15, what we suggested to them, which I thought was a reasonable idea, is that we buy an oak tree this big, and then we've got 15 grand, or no, how much have we got? Probably 14,980,000 pounds to pay a gardener to look after that oak tree for the next 20 years, haven't we? And it would make so much better sense and work so much better. But at the moment, we're faced with this ridiculous stuff. And we've also got to have conversations about where we put. We've got to get away from this horticultural thing of you must blanket everything in topsoil because that's the right thing to do. It's this stupidness. So when you have these big infrastructure projects, that's when you have the chance to make fascinating, complex substrates, and because you've got all the machinery on site. So what we don't want is for every piece of landscape to be scraped flat and then brought in 8-10 inches of topsoil and just dumped over the whole thing. Because all that does, if you make something flat and you make the same soil all over it, it just means you'll have a very similar vegetation, won't you, over the whole lot. As soon as you vary the topography in the soil, you get variation in vegetation. So the mantra for the biodiversity net gain metric, I think, should be ecological theme park. Now, I know it sounds a bit Essexy and a little bit kind of naff, but it's absolutely true. I think we need as much different things in one space. We really can't afford not to do this, because this absolutely drives biodiversity. And if anyone has a chance to come down to me and see our place, we can go through the, you know, some of the figures, because we've got it well monitored now, our place. And it's easy to do, and I do it, right? 4 acres of garden, 3 companies I have, and I'm 62, right? So I managed to do this on, you know, without too much help. So that, I'd say, is the mantra we should use. Obviously, this makes sense. Reuse the stuff you have on site. Don't take demolition waste away if you don't have to. It makes perfect sense. At the moment, with the construction industry reuses it within construction, I think there's huge opportunities, obviously, to use it in landscape as well. Because you have a massive choice usually when places are getting demolished. You have a huge choice of materials. If anyone's interested in the conversation around substrates and the connection between that and delivering biodiversity net gain, then me and Richard produced this document for SAIM, which is peer reviewed. You'll be pleased to know, which is the only peer reviewed thing I've ever done. It's a bloody nightmare. The total, no, I can understand what you guys have to go through, because I kept sending all this stuff in, and they kept throwing it back to me and saying, "Well, where's the evidence for this?" And anyway, it was a nightmare. Anyway, we ground through it. Well, Richard basically did it in the end, pretty much, and with me kind of just shouting at him. Anyway, that is peer reviewed. It's got some quite interesting. It's not huge. It's only 6 or 7 pages. So these are another few some of the materials that we mess around with. So brick waste, very, I'd say, as an aesthetic, people really like it. It's a really lovely color, really nice material. In the public space, people really like the contrast of that color and the vegetation. Grows plants very easily. Thank you very much. Ceramic waste is the other one that we've used, which is a more unusual waste, but is absolute genius, this stuff. The problem is you have a job to get hold of it a bit. It's basically all the toilets and sinks and stuff that they take from demolition, because they have to separate them from the main demolition waste. And then it's crushed up into bigger pieces that they kind of sell as some sort of decorative thing. And then we buy the dust that's left over. And it's totally wonderful. These plants on the right are growing purely in ceramic waste. We have loads of areas in our garden growing just in ceramic waste, no organic material at all. And it's also used on a roof, and I can't remember which one it is. There's a roof around here on the Olympic Park, a big roof that used ceramic waste. UEL have done some studies of it. I think it's one of the, I think, as far as I can tell, it's one of the best roofs from a biodiversity point of view. Really interesting stuff. This bee is quite interesting because this reinforces that idea of plants not being the most important thing. So this is a Brian bee, the most beautiful bee, like, you know, it really is. It only collects pollen from white bryony, which is a very common hedgerowy kind of plant. It was one of my favorite plants. I had loads of it in my garden. And when my mate James, the entomologist, turned up, I was really miffed that I didn't have the bryony bee, because I kept saying, well, I've got loads of bryony, you know, why haven't I got the bryony bee? And then he explains to me in no uncertain terms that it nests in sandy, sunny, bare soil, and I didn't have any sunny, bare soil because I'm on clay. So we brought Sunny some sand in. We put a few barrel loads of sand in our place, in a sunny place, and we got the bee. And it's that conversation around the structure and the topography and the variation. It's the breeding space, the hibernation space. It's the microclimates that drive the ecosystem. It's not just the plants. You know what I mean? The plants are one element of it. The other joy about using construction waste or mineral soils, or certainly maybe moving your topsoil to that place and exposing the subsoil, is that those materials are completely weed free. You know what I mean? The problem with making a meadow, as any gardeners here probably know, you know, making a meadow in topsoil is a bit of a nightmare, because how do you get it clean enough so that when you sow your seeds, that everything else doesn't come up and not the ones that you've just sowed. And the thing is with subsoils and with construction waste, it is completely weed free. So when you put it down, like we did here, chucked it down, got a pack of seed out and just chucked the seed around. And all our gardens are created from seed mixes, direct sown. And direct sowing is absolutely the most sustainable way to create a landscape, isn't it? You compare that to pots. For starters, we did that whole garden for 40 quid of seed. Secondly, imagine how much, and we're trying to get students to look at this, imagine how much you put a seed in a seed tray, plastic, compost, germinate it, put it in a plug tray, more plastic, more compost, water it every day, probably in a plug tray every day, 9 centimetre pot, more plastic, more compost, 2 litre, 3 litre pot, deliver it to site in a lorry. How much water, plastic waste, carbon, energy is involved in that one plant? It's massive. And it's a part of our industry in horticulture that we kind of choose to just push to the back a bit. So direct sowing, definitely a brilliant way to sow, to create a landscape. And this is the other massive thing that's missing in our landscape. So dead stuff. I mean, carcasses would be great, more tricky than dead wood. Dead wood's kind of safer, more sanitized. But carcasses would be great. Dung, great. All these things we're missing out of our public landscape, completely missing. So there's a whole massive ecosystem missing around. Anyway, we can only really deal with the dead vegetation, can't we, in our world, I suppose. We've got to ignore the other stuff. I mean, I suppose you could get some dung in some way, but anyway. What I think we should be doing is designing in dead things. So when you design the landscape, okay, you do your plant scheme and all the other things you want to do, but then think, where can I fit the dead stuff? How can I get dead material into my beautiful design? And you can do it in lots of ways. Obviously, you can stick a little log pile down. Obviously, that happens already. But one of the most important habitats is standing dead. And you can do that by just planting dead trees. So much safer from a council point of view, because you're never going to get any flack then, are you? You know, about, oh, my trees died. And you're wasting money planting trees that are all dead. Plant a dead tree, cut all that hassle out. And then you can also design your dead tree in exactly where you want it. You don't have to wait for the tree to die. You can get this trunk from wherever it is, pieces of maintenance or a tree surgeon, wherever you want to get it. Dig a hole, plant your tree, and make it part of the design of your building. And dead hedge is exactly the same. You know, you can make these beautiful things happen with the material that you cut off the hedge that's only about 10 meters from where you've made the dead hedge, can't you? So you get lovely structure, great looking piece of landscape, fantastic habitat, and you've dealt with the waste on site. But what you do need is a bit more time and maybe an odd more gardeners. So instead of chucking all this stuff into a chipper, loads of carbon, loads of energy, and then carting it off in a lorry somewhere. This is a beautiful way to do it. You just got to invest in a little bit more labor, a little bit more hands-on, you know.
So we just have a couple more minutes.
Okay. Students abusing a tree? That's maybe a good way to finish. So, these are some UCL students, and I go and talk to them in UCL, and I tell them how good dead things are, and that we should speed the process up. And then when they come to me, I let them abuse a tree. And I think that's the thing about hands-on, is that sticks in their head then, and they carve their name and they do whatever else they want to do. This is generating biodiversity. And just quickly, to do that in a beautiful way, there's just been a whole world of stuff going on now with abusing trees, but in a beautiful way. And I think this has huge potential in public space. Make it look good, and it's going to be great. And just by doing that, which we did to our willow tree, the biodiversity is just balloons as soon as you've got a tree that's dying and living at the same time. That's why ancient oak trees are so good, because they're living on the outside and they're dying in the middle. That's why they're packed with biodiversity. So if you can speed that process up, because we don't have the luxury of time again, I don't think, then that's a really good thing. Yeah, there's a video. This is a video of our yard in Barket Riverside. So this is some of the work we've done along the boundary to introduce sand. And this is where we found the first Echium Viper's bugloss bee outside London, because we just did that. We just worked along the edge of our boundary. Because we're trying to prove on our industrial estate that you can make money and make ecology, and that we're working on roofs, on boundaries, and on portable habitat to prove that. And we're starting to run workshops there now. Okay, that's probably it, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you so much, John. That was brilliant. Does anyone have, I think we have time for one question. Anyone have a question? Yes.
On our local park, Daubney Fields, with dead lanes and paths, dug out loads of topsoil, so it's not substrate, it's topsoil, turf. We're going to keep it on site, create mounds. Is there anything else we could do with it apart from create mounds? You said what you're saying about topsoil.
Well, topsoil, yeah. I mean, it's not as easy to do things with it. In that it's better to grow food than probably anything else. Because you have enough topsoil everywhere else. I mean, so you're not going to create a different habitat.
You get structural diversity for them.
Yeah, you could do it would just help to have a mound, but then mounds are tricky to maintain. So you'd have to be careful about who's maintaining it and how they're going to look after it, because they can't put a mower over it if you make it too much of a mound. I guess you could treat it as a place that you might want to grow some native shrubs that aren't local. You could plant into it, or you can put some shrubs that need a bit more acute drainage, because you're putting it on a mound, so you're creating the drainage. Because that's one of the other things about topography is quite useful, is that you broaden your plant choice as soon as you make a mound, because you then create good drainage and poor drainage in different places. So maybe you could look at plants that require more acute drainage than the actual ground itself.
Cool. I think we will have to wrap up there. But please do join us. So we've organised tea and coffee and cakes and stuff on our own roof garden. Just because John has some more time to hang out with us for a bit. So please do join us for a discussion. So the access to the roof garden is on the first floor. So if a few P&L people can lead the way, and for our guests, that'd be really helpful. And the other thing is, this is the last seminar of the seminar series. I organise it along with help from Dan. So if you've got ideas of people that you would like us to invite next year, so starting in September, please do let me know. So we're always, the sort of loose theme of it is we look outwards beyond academia to people who are practitioners or kind of on the cusp between academia and practitioners in